All right, so we are off and running. I just hit record. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you joining us for DAG's monthly meeting for June 2021 on community-driven development in Kensington. My name is Eli Storch. I'm the chair of the Design Advocacy Group. Appreciate you joining us today. As you come in, you'll be muted. Please, unless you're asking a question or making an announcement, please stay muted so we can keep our audio quality up. If you do have any technical difficulties, you can reach out to myself. You can reach out to Lachelle Weathers or David Brownlee. We'll do our best to help you as we get going. And if you have any questions, if you have any announcements, please get them in the chat. We'll start off with some announcements, some reminders, some advocacy items, and we'd love to hear any upcoming items that you'd like to share with us. So please put those in the chat, and I'll ask you to unmute and share, or if you just want to put a link in, I'll draw people's attention to it. So typically the DAG meetings have been off the record, but because we were able to record and share so easily with Zoom, we made the decision to record and share easily with Zoom. So we've been putting our programs up on our website. So this one will be up in the next day or two. You can go there now and check out past events. Last month, we were looking at how Philadelphia's music venues are resisting residential development pressure. Before that, we were looking at Peacelands, the new elementary and middle school in University City. So there's a lot of content there that we've begun to post during the pandemic as we've switched to Zoom. We're going to continue with Zoom as we're able to access more people. So please take a look at those links and click around the website. And shameless plug, if you like what you see, there's a support button that helps us operate if you want to send a few dollars our way. So I'm going to call on George Claflin and David Brownlee to give a couple of advocacy announcements. But while those are going, please put things in the chat that you want us to draw attention to, upcoming events and the like. So George, you want to take the screen?
Yes, I'm attempting to share the screen here. Are you seeing this on the screen?
Not yet.
Uh-oh. There it is. Okay. Share. All right.
You've got your screen, George.
Oh, you have the screen now. Are you?
You might want to click full screen or presenter mode.
Yes, I'm looking
all the way to the left.
All the way to the left. It just on my screen it says all the way to the left is from the beginning.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, there we go. Okay, this morning we have a mix of good things and questionable things to report on. The first is a good thing. This is a photograph from Inga's article about the Pencoid Ironworks restoration, which a wonderful developer has undertaken in Lower Merion, which has a 7-mile waterfront that is vastly underused. And you can see some of the type of buildings in the background there, big parking podium and kind of boring top. But the developer here has kept the rusting steel of the original ironworks and installed and renovated an existing building, the brick building you can see in the background. And the access from Philadelphia is primarily by the pedestrian and bicycle bridge that you see on the right there. So this just seems like a great project, and I hope that DAG and our advocacy community can foster more of these. And that's really all I want to say about it, but I think it's important to note it. I'm going to come back to this because David has quite a few things to say about this. I'll come back to this because we have another good thing to report. The Float Lab. This is a project related to Bartram Gardens. This will be a floating station, you might say, in the river that will, in the Schuylkill River, which will enable you to relate to the river at several different levels. And it's being done by the very interesting firm of Howler Yoon from Boston. Ms. Yoon is the Dean of She was the head of the department at MIT, and now she's the dean of architecture and planning at Cornell. So this is, again, more on the reporting side. Now on an advocacy issue, I don't have quite the best images for this. Carousel House. Surprisingly, Carousel House in Fairmount Park West is scheduled. They're now talking about demolition, and this is the only rec center that is open and has major programming for handicapped people. And the issue seems to be that some advocates say all the money should be spent on mainstream in the neighborhoods. My question is, why not both? This building, designed by the distinguished Philadelphia architect Dick Meyer, one not to be confused with Richard Meyer of New York, won several design awards when it was originally built, and it's only 34 years old, has not been maintained. The city of Philadelphia, particularly the Parks Department, is notoriously lax on maintenance. I mean, one of my questions is scale. If you want to play pickup or league wheelchair basketball, you need a critical mass of players. Do you get that at every local rec center? Obviously, the rec centers should be accessible and they should have programming, but this facility is highly specialized and also, among other things, has a pool with a movable floor that can permit wheelchairs to go right into the water. I have made contact with Dick Meyer, and he's of course an advocate of preservation, and it's an ongoing story. So we're open to commentary or open to people who would like to comment one way or the other on that, either now or via email. So I think it's an issue we should track, not representing an opinion on it at this time. Okay, the Poop Building. The Poop Building was approved by zoning, even though I believe the council person was opposed to it. And the Poop Building is called the Poop Building. This is in West Philadelphia, I think at 48th and Chester, designed by Jerry Roller. The building, one of the opponents of the building was trying to make the claim that gentrification or density or something was going to cause medical problems different than the ones urban dwellers already have, and was requesting a fecal sample from people to help prove that point. And that's the reason it's called the Poop Building. Inga, this photograph is courtesy of J.K. Roller. Inga points out that in these slides from the Inquirer, that these are the contextual buildings in the neighborhood, 3-4-story apartment buildings. So that this building is not really particularly different. It's actually a little shorter than many of the buildings in the neighborhood. So that's the issue. Again, open for comment or discussion. DAG has not taken a position on it. It's further in the design beat, and again, while the zoning board of adjustment has not met a project that it hasn't approved in quite a while, this may be one that where there's less objection. And now I turn it over to David on both Catherine Street, Doctors Row, and then the Parkway.
Right, thank you. So on Doctors Row, there's rather good news. As you know, when the developer proposal that you see in the rather comic, if it weren't terrifying, image on the left, when that developer proposal was put forward, we joined with others in calling for something better. Unfortunately, it was perfectly legal to do exactly that you see on the left-hand side. But with a certain amount of jawboning, the developer was convinced to do something slightly less awful, which is that. It nevertheless catalyzed interest in working to secure protection for this neighborhood in particular, and for sites related to African-American history in general. And the momentum for this has grown quite rapidly. Councilman Kenyatta Johnson has proposed a demolition moratorium on several blocks, I think about 5 blocks of Christian Street, in the area that it really is a very recent nickname of Doctors Row, which was a center for African-American life in the early years, the first 4 decades, say, of the 20th century. Julian Abel, the architect, lived next door to the building that you see here, which until this discussion began was the only protected property on this entire block. The Preservation Alliance is preparing a designation of a historic district in this area, and to basically hold the fort while that goes forward, Johnson's bill before council would impose a 1-year moratorium on demolitions in this area. There are a lot of demolition permits that have already been pulled in this for these very handsome late 19th century row houses. So that is moving forward on 2 fronts. And I think the broader issue is that this is raising interest in and an understanding of the deficit of protection that we've provided for sites related to African-American history in the city, and hopefully can energize us to do more. And I know that there are many people who are trying to do more, and we need more of that. A couple of other things, just I want to report briefly. We've talked here about the wonderful group of little Gothic revival buildings that were the first buildings built by the Philadelphia Gas Works at its site in Point Breeze. That discussion of the designation by the Historical Commission has been postponed until the fall. So that's where that stands at the moment. The final thing that I want to talk for a moment about, George alluded to, and that is the Parkway Ideas Workshop, co-sponsored by Parks and Recreation and by Otis. The kickoff event for that was last night in a series of presentations, one of which I've put I've put a link to the YouTube video for that in the chat. The kickoff was for the 3 selected teams. There were about 16 teams who put forward their qualifications. 3 teams were selected to proceed over the next month to brainstorm ideas for the Parkway. This isn't a design competition, it's an ideas competition, focusing on the western end of the Parkway, the Aikens Oval area. Traffic taming is explicitly included among the things that are desired. So is increased pedestrian activity, more life on the Parkway. The selected firms are the Design Workshop, an international firm that was born in North Carolina. On their team is Ground Reconsidered, the Philadelphia landscape architecture firm. The second team is something called D-Land Studio, teaming up with the Philadelphia firm Digsaw. D-Land is based in Brooklyn. And the final team is a Rotterdam-based team, MVRDV, it's called by its initials, MVRDV, and they're teamed up with Atkin Olshan Shade in Philadelphia. So these three teams all have Philadelphia participants on them, and the project just kicked off last night. As again, the YouTube video of the event is in the chat. And you'll see that there are gigantic technical glitches because the event was supposed to be out of doors and was moved at the last minute indoors, and they didn't really have it all together. In any case, take a look at that. The rollout, the presentation of the proposals of the 3 firms will be on July 14th, on Bastille Day, at the Barnes Foundation. Look for information about that. That's it.
Thank you, David. So yeah, a couple things in the chat. Thanks, Vinny's, for posting the Jane's Walk postcards. You can go on there. Since Jane's Walk is postponed, you can go make a postcard from your area of the city and send it out, and they'll add it to their map so that they'll have a map of photographic postcards from around the city, which I think is a pretty cool idea. Kathy Dowdell also was posting about the affordability precedent being set at that 48th and Chester project, that the Cedar Park neighbors were one of the area RCOs supporting that project, and 15 units, so roughly 20% of the units are set at 40% of AMI, which is a significant amount of affordability in a private development. So hopefully that can help set a precedent and move things, move some things forward. So thank you for
one thing on the Catherine Street project. Faye Anderson of our steering committee has commented that there really are other districts that are more worthy of recognition than the Catherine Street one, and she had some objections to that. I don't think she's on this morning, but she has communicated with the steering committee on this point, and I think it should be noted as an issue.
Thanks, George. And
I don't think anyone involved with this would say that this is the only site that should be considered.
So I want to pass the baton over to Marcia Moss to talk about our next upcoming DAG program. Marcia?
Trying to unmute.
You're unmuted.
We can hear you.
Okay, thanks, Eli, and hi, everyone. This morning, we're focusing on Kensington. Next month, we'll be looking at the Navy Yard. And as you know, Mosaic Development Partners has been given exclusive rights for 109 acres at the Navy Yard, and they'll soon be launching that next dynamic chapter. To that end, Mosaic is committed to using a robust approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that aspect, that key aspect of its vision will provide opportunities for all Philadelphians. So join us to hear more from Leslie Smallwood Lewis, who is Mosaic's co-founder and owner, on July 8th at 10 a.m. See you then. Eli?
Thanks, Marcia. And yeah, we're finalizing the last details on that, and that will be up on our website to get tickets shortly. Tickets like this are free, but you need to get them so you can get the Zoom access. Last couple pieces of business before we get into our presentation. If you would like to get in touch and share an opinion piece, we have the DAG forum. Oscar Beisert posted a really nice piece on the Point Breeze Gas Works that David mentioned. So there you can read a little more about that there. You can get in touch with dagfellow@gmail.com or to David Brownlee through the website. So if you want to share, that is a nice opportunity to have anyone contribute thoughts and opinions to the DAG community. So please go ahead with that if you have anything you'd like to share with us. So let's get into the program. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so throughout, please add some questions to the chat and we'll make sure to address them. But I would I'm excited for this program and I'm happy to pass it along to George Claflin to introduce Dr. McKinney. George?
Thank you, Eli. It's a great honor to be able to introduce Dr. McKinney to this group. We're sort of newcomers to the group. As you can see, we're kind of largely white, not all, and we're very sensitive and aware of that. We're again newcomers with the great sincerity that was indeed prodded by your passionate statement on the closure of the Somerset station, which many of us completely agreed with. And we could not comprehend how a public utility or public service could be denied to citizens who had invested their time and money over many years to live in a neighborhood based upon its access to public transportation and all sorts of other public services. And your statement of that and your imagery was very evocative. Kensington as an island was another image that struck many people. And we can only surmise that might have had something to do with the relatively short closure period. And we're very honored to have you here. Dr. McKinney has 3 degrees in anthropology from Cleveland State, University of Maryland, and a PhD from Temple. He was the deputy director of the Howard Samuels Center and then the director of the Howard Samuels Center at the Graduate Center of the City of University of New York, focusing on research and public policy and civic engagement. So he's been in the civic engagement arena for a long time. He was the executive vice president and director of research and evaluation for the Food Trust here in Philadelphia, and moved from that job to the New Kensington CDC. And he is a longtime resident of McPherson Square. So he is at ground zero. You may recall the McPherson Square Library is the library that has kits for drug abuse rescue purposes and librarians who know how to use them. It's an extremely challenging condition, and he has spoken repeatedly with great passion about the efforts to revitalize a neighborhood that some forces appear only to want to gentrify. And I think with that, I will stop, and I'm sure you, Dr. McKinney, feel free to mention anything that I have left out.
All right, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you everyone for inviting me out today. I enjoy dialogue. I enjoy, engaging with folks who may bring different perspective and different expertise to situations. And I enjoy being in situations that also force me to think through, what am I doing, right? Because on a day-to-day, sometimes we just function. There's so much going on in the world. So I appreciate y'all inviting me to come on out. Again, I'm Bill McKinney. I do not have a PowerPoint. We're not going to do a PowerPoint today, so I'm going to do my best to just be engaging, and hopefully folks will stay with me. I also just sort of say, keep in mind there's a lot of things that I'm processing, because while I'm a longtime resident of Philadelphia, about 25 years, and as was just described, 20-year resident of McPherson Square, I've only been at New Kensington for 6 months, and that's in the midst of a pandemic and everything else going on in the world. So I'm still, processing a lot of things, and some of that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. I think, I just put that as a little bit of context. It's good to see a number of different people who are here today. In particular, I see that there's at least one board member from our organization, and I also see our new Director of Real Estate and Economic Development, who's going to be starting in about 2 weeks. So hopefully nothing I say gets me fired or gets our new director to resign. Hopefully this is all stuff that we all go, hey, okay, we're still moving on the same path. And that's what's, very real. I also, as you're talking about sort of that introduction and, the piece I wrote about Kensington being an island and the challenges, and I'm going to talk more about that, literally as we're speaking. I was a little distracted earlier because I am at my sort of home office and I'm looking out at McPherson Square, which is, there's a library there that is, it's got, I think, $13 million allocated through the rebuild project, but it's held up for a number of different political and economic and, social and political reasons. There's probably between 110, 120 people actively using in the park right now. There are cars being towed that have been parked out in front on this street for the past 5 months that people are living in. They're literally being towed right now. This morning, there was an article about the state attorney general's Kensington initiative and for a series of arrests that took place on this corner, Clementine and E Street, which is essentially where I live, where they netted 8,000 doses of heroin. And I say that just to give, again, a little bit of scale, that that is a major bust that goes to, making national news, because it actually made it to some folks in a couple other cities that sent me the information. But when you start talking about a scale of how much usage there is of the 5 to 7 million needles distributed every year up here in Kensington, and you start doing the math of what 8,000 doses equals, is about a 2 or 3 hour interruption. And again, I know we're not here to talk about all those pieces, but you can't talk about development in Kensington without talking about the context. Those are the challenges. Those are why things have and haven't happened in the past. That's why a different strategy needs to exist for us to have any success moving forward. So, with all of that in mind, the way I'm sort of going to try and chop this up a little bit is I'm going to talk a little bit about me, because I think that who I am brings sort of, again, more context to the strategies of how we're trying to make some changes here. I'm going to talk a little bit about New Kensington CDC and where it sort of sits within some of the changes that hopefully are taking place within the community. I'm going to talk about some just general sort of broad concepts around community-driven development. And I'm going to give some different examples, whether it was things that have happened with SEPTA, whether it's around larger strategies, again, within the community that I feel need to be adjusted for there to be any sustainable success moving forward. And I'm going to sort of try and tie all that into, some of the recommendations I would make sort of going forward. And then I will say again, I hope that folks who are here, who are interested in this conversation, who are interested in Kensington, remain engaged, reach out, and let's have the conversation continue, because this is going to be an ongoing process, obviously. And we're going to really need to continue to check in and make adjustments so that we can have some success. So hopefully that's a good plan for everyone, and we can all dig in a little bit. As my bio sort of indicates, I have this background in anthropology, which might not be a traditional, path to sitting in the seat that I'm in. I'm trained as an urban anthropologist, and also I think really significant as an applied anthropologist. So I was somebody who, as an undergraduate in the 80s, looked and I fell in love with the methods that were connected with anthropology, but I also, really from my upbringing said, okay, now what do I do with this? How do I make change with what I believe is a really powerful way of looking at the world? And that's where I sort of discovered that there was this other path connected to applied anthropology. And so how do I recognize the urban space as a unique space that has its own sort of set of rules and way that it operates and that we have to take into account, and how do I understand how people in the sort of the built environment, the political economic context, all of those things, how do they come into play? How do we put all of that together, and how do we make change as a result? So again, as you sort of heard in the introduction, once I finished school, I really was looking at how do I continue to add additional tools to my toolkit, right? I think sometimes a narrow path leads to narrow results, right? And if we have one tool in our toolkit, we try and fix everything with it. And I've been known to do that, right? When I only had a hammer, I try to fix windows with hammers. I'm trying to fix plumbing with hammers. And guess what? It doesn't work, So how do we bring everything from the sort of micro and macro solution-oriented stuff to the table. And so that's why you'll see, again, with a lot of the different pieces that I've been playing with for a long time, some people would look and they go, it's not narrowly focused enough. No, it's the reality of the world, right? Like education, housing, poverty, youth, incarcerate, like you just go down the list. Those are the spaces I've been operating in for a number of years, because those are the realities. Those are the social determinants that impact this community as well as most communities really significantly. And we have to have a handle on them. We can't just plop down one sort of solution in the midst of all of this and not understand how it all works together. And so that's where you see, again, a lot of my path. And as an anthropologist who studied, for a long time in a lot of ways at a very micro level, I looked and I said, hey, I need to make a bit of a shift. And that's when I decided to go to the City University of New York and work in this space that was working very much at a national policy level, but was still focused on ideas around community engagement, civic participation, and really thinking about how that affects all sorts of different situations, how that drives different solutions again. I spent a number of years there looking at, again, a broad range of issues. I'm not going to go into all of what we did there, but what I felt like I came out with was a better understanding of how the politics and policy of things operate, both at the local level as well as the state and federal, and that all again needed to come into play as I was looking for solutions. At the same time, I continued, again, a lot of different little pieces of the work that I've been doing in Kensington this whole time. I never moved from Kensington. I commuted to New York for almost 10 years because I love Kensington. I love Philadelphia so much. And I didn't want to give up my commitment to this community and to the people in it. And so there was things that I was constantly learning again, that I was able to look at the micro and the macro at the same time and just think about ways to apply it. When I finished there, as it was indicated again, I was over at the Food Trust for a number of years, doing work again here in Philadelphia, but really also all throughout the country, designing a lot of different programs and working with, especially a lot of community development corporations throughout the country and thinking about health and thinking about how that changes communities in a lot of different ways. So again, I'm not going to go crazy with all that, but I do think it's important to understand who I am, to understand what perspective I bring to the situation. I do think it's also, again, very important that I am of this neighborhood. And at this point, I'm comfortable saying I'm from this neighborhood. I've lived here longer than anywhere I've lived in my whole life. This is my home. I'm invested in it, and I care about it very deeply. So, over a number of years, again, I've had a lot of different roles within this community, whether it was serving as a board member for different organizations in the area, whether it's as a researcher. I've researched a lot of violence intervention programs, mentoring programs, all sorts of things. Whether it's just as somebody who goes out and cleans a playground or whatever it is, this community is a part of my life. When, again, in the introduction, race was brought up, this country has been going through its latest iteration of racial reckoning over the past year or so. And it's manifested in a number of different ways. The overt racism is the history of Kensington in a number of ways. It's a transference from classism to racism in its history. And how it's played out is clearly a part of what's been going on. A year ago, we're talking at a time that really a year ago, there was a lot of attention to a lot of things that happened throughout the country and throughout the city, not as much attention to what happened in Kensington. But again, looking out my window, there was complete pandemonium, a year ago. There was a reckoning that was taking place. And, folks ask me, why did it happen here? And I remember saying and writing, I actually wrote some stuff about it, just saying it had to happen here. it was destined to happen here. The divestment, again, the racism, all of those things coming together, it had to happen here. It's unfortunate, but it was as predictable as could be. And that's where we also have to think through things. And when I think of solutions, I'm always trying to use, my skills of understanding the past to understand the future, and make sure that I know where something is going. And that's how we really build good solutions, in my opinion. So, I bring all this to bring you back to sort of New Kensington a little bit. A year ago, on May 31st, I went out and I stood on Kensington Ave, 300 feet from my house, and like I said, stepped into a surreal world, and then that night I watched a half block burn down, from my window, and then I went out there. I stood in person as that happened, and the next morning I went out and I stood on the street in front of literally a skeleton of a building, as they're still like putting a little bit of water on it. And I was standing there with actually the executive director of Impact Services, another CDC in the area, who I did not know at the time, but he was out there. And I remember the feeling of just feeling helpless, standing in a place that I care so much about, knowing that there was a complete collapse at that moment, but also knowing that there were people who were gleeful at that, because this was going to be their opportunity to come in and extract more wealth from this community. And that all concerned me. I felt helpless and I felt hopeless. And then I went home and I remembered that NKCDC was looking for an executive director. And I wrote a letter and I said, hey, like, if you're still looking, consider me. I'm here, I'm ready to go. And it hit me that, again, all the things I just described about my history, all of those pieces, all of the tools I've been throwing in my bag, it was time to use them here at my home. And I asked for that chance, and I'm grateful that I was given the opportunity to join the organization last November. So it's a long introduction, but again, I think it's important because it drives how I'm thinking about what we have to do. Again, I'm grateful to the organization for taking me in, and I'm grateful for someone like Nicole who's willing to come join us now as we continue on this journey. So, New Kensington, if folks are not familiar with the organization, we're a community development corporation, obviously, and our mission is to advance social equity and economic empowerment by nurturing and creating opportunities for residents to live in and actively shape their neighborhoods of choice. We cover a very large geography. We go from south of Girard to sort of Kensington in front, all the way up to Frankfort Creek to the north, and all the way to the river. Obviously, anyone who knows Philly, that's a lot of different neighborhoods with a lot of different needs. And we are sort of in a constant process of making the adjustments of really, addressing those needs. But that comes very much through our relationships with the communities that we work in. And again, that has to be the core of any development strategy, as far as I'm concerned, and I think most of the other folks that I work with. We need to be in a constant relationship. I was just talking with a group that was talking about an engagement process, and up here, because there's so many problems, there's a new engagement process every week that someone is starting. And they were asking about what's the best strategy and how are we going to do this? And I said, to have an ongoing relationship with the community, to not be starting over and over again and then disappearing. And that's something that I was proud to join at New Kensington, that relationship existed with the communities that we're working with. There's always more that we can do and there's more that we can build on, but that's something that is a central tenet of the organization. And I'll talk about that a little bit when I talk about SEPTA and what happened up here and how we were able to activate and mobilize quickly because the relationship existed. There's a lot of different ways that we get the work done up here. But some of the core again is that really making sure that we want to make sure that the most vulnerable folks in this community are able to avoid displacement. That we are actively working against that. There's a lot of different ways again that we've sort of centered that in our work, and you can see that to a certain degree in how we're broken apart. Hopefully we're not too siloed, but having a real estate part of our organization that focuses in a lot of ways on building affordable housing, but takes on some other responsibilities as well, looking at economic development and how that works so closely with specifically some of the corridors that we are heavily involved in, whether it's Kensington or Frankfurt and some others, working with small businesses, all of that good stuff. There is a housing department that helps keep people in their homes in a number of different ways. There is a community engagement department that, again, really makes sure that we're working with the community, understanding their needs so that we can be responsive. And as a part of that, we've seen, for instance, that we need to increase our ability to support people in health and wellness. So we built that out, for instance. And that's the type of organization that we try and be. And again, it's the core of, in my opinion, how we need to be moving forward with the development strategy for this community as a whole. I think most folks are, at least somewhat familiar with Kensington as a whole. But the reality is, and I'm not going to drill down forever in it. I think even just what I shared at the beginning gives you, a real context of the types of things that are going on up here. We talk about the pandemic in general, and I think a lot of us up here will say, yes, it's impacted what's happening up here, but for us, we have a pandemic sitting on multiple epidemics. This is the epicenter in many ways of poverty in the city, in the state, and therefore in the country. This is the epicenter of the opioid, and I'm actually stopping saying opioid as much. I'm just trying to tell myself that because the usage of crack and methamphetamines is going through the roof right now, and that changes the game again. Each one of these things, and the reason I'm so obsessive about each piece is because it's a variable, and those variables start getting added up. It's data, and the data starts changing where we have to go on a day-to-day basis. I think about it from a forecasting standpoint, that I can't be on paths that are so linear that I'm not adjusting to the new information that's coming in on a daily basis, which is what's going to actually lead to real solutions. And I'm here for real solutions. That's it. That's it. And so I'm trying to keep editing myself even as I'm speaking, because that's a hard transition because we've been talking about it a certain way for so long. But again, I say those things because these are massive issues, and unless you've spent time here, it is hard to grasp the level of suffering and the level of trauma that is in this community. I did a walking tour with State Senator last Friday, which I often really won't do, just because this isn't a sideshow. This isn't for gawking. This is for, if you're here, you want to do something, I'll spend that type of time with you. And I appreciated, they're willing to spend a couple hours and really take things in and hear the context. And it was a hot summer day in Kensington, and we walked the corridors, and I explained who owns what. I explained how, whether it's developers or speculators in different ways, have been sitting on property for years and years, leading to all sorts of blight that's assigned to the residents, right? No one looks and says, oh my goodness, Kensington's so run down because of a multi-million-dollar corporation that's looking to extract as many dollars as possible down the road. They look and they go, look at these people in Kensington, they're nasty. That's what people say, but we don't, as I've said before, New Kensington doesn't own a single property on Kensington Ave. You know, we don't control it as a nonprofit, and the residents out here who are feeling the effects of all of these things, we don't own and control most of what's going on up here. And I think that's an important fact for people to think about. What I also constantly pushing and was trying to explain to them was, you know, that this isn't a Kensington issue here. This is a regional issue. This is coming from multiple states, from throughout the suburbs, from throughout the city. And it's been very intentional in pushing all of these issues into one space. And it's as has historically happened throughout the country in many ways. Where do you push things? You push things to those with the least power. And in this country, the people with the least power are people of color and those with the least amount of money, right? And so we push all of these things here and we make these agreements with the community, but we have no plan to actually solve any problems down the road. And that's sort of how I'm going to end some of this. But that is the community that he was walking through with me with his aide. And when we started the walk, they had a lot of smart things to say. I'm just going to say that, like, they had a lot of things that were perfect from the book, you know? And at the end of the walk, after, again, seeing the human toll, right? The human toll, both of those that are sick and suffering directly out in the streets, as well as the thousands, and that's what has to be remembered too, the thousands and thousands of people that were behind closed doors because of the fear of being out there, all suffering different forms of trauma, right? Because people want to pit communities against each other. We're all suffering from these solutions that are failed solutions. Walking through everything, again, from physical injury to violence, walking through literally walked through 2 knife fights, people being brought back to life with Narcan. Just go right down the list in a simple 1.25 mile walk. And I said, what's your take at the end? And they said, I'm traumatized just from a 2-hour walk. And then they stopped themselves and they said, and I recognized immediately this was 2 hours for me, where this is whole, people's whole lives. So again, I say all this not to be overly dramatic. I don't say it to be ridiculous or whatever. I'm saying it to say this is the context in which a development plan has to be developed, right? This is not every other place America. This is a unique situation, and that's why I was talking before again around information, changes in players, changes every day. That's why I take in when that car gets moved and what that means to the next thing over here, and all of that is relevant as we figure out where we're going. So that goes right into like really the next piece for me, where I'm talking about, right when I got there, maybe within, a month or so, I wrote this small piece for Generosity that was really around community-driven development and really thinking about, and it was a point for me, where I'm sitting there going, where the hell am I going to go with this thing, right? I wanted to be here. I'm taking on a beast. What are the core principles that I really need to just make sure are in place? Understanding, again, so much more has to be built off of it, making sure that it's aligned with the strategic plan and the mission of the organization, but most importantly, making sure that it's aligned in terms of where we're going with what the community wants and needs, and really from that, I'm not going to go through all of what I had to say in there, but I'm saying this because the themes are going to keep coming up in everything that I talk about here. It was really just looking at, the like 5 or 6 main things. One, just really looking at, from a design and planning standpoint, the importance of a participatory community engagement process, and one that is about shared power. And how important that is for what we're doing. And that's why I'm also, what I said before, when I'm describing the difference between an engagement process that is bounded and it's gonna be these 2 months, and that's what we're gonna do, and then it's over, versus a relationship with the community, that we're not going anywhere. And when you're dissatisfied with it and when it's off the rails, you can come knock on my door, literally. You know, that's a different engagement process that's taking place. And understanding that that there needs to be a transfer and control of resources over time. You know, that as we're looking at communities through a really, we look at this community in particular through a deficit lens, instead of really looking at all of the value that is here. And that's always one of these things that always throws me off, right? We look at communities through a deficit lens, while folks are actually trying to extract value from them, right? Think of that contradiction and how we need to interrupt that. And part of the interruption is a part of the process, and helping and working with communities through transparency to understand the value of their community, and that they hold power in that exchange, and making sure that they are empowered to have that, right? I'm not gonna go on and on there, but I could. And that shifts right into the next piece, which is really around making sure that the primary beneficiaries of any sort of change are the community. And I get in that conversation on a regular basis with people right now. And again, these are the parts where I don't know what I should say in front of, a board member. But, there's people I just straight up say, hey, I'm doing the math. I understand what the value is here. And there are relationships we're going to enter into and ones we are not going to, because they are not going to primarily benefit the community. And I will draw that line in the sand. And if that means, I'm joking about the board, I appreciate that the board is also understood and has been supportive of the idea, if old relationships are leading to the same sort of failed solutions, we need new relationships. My responsibility, if we're going to move away from certain things, is to bring in new people. That's why I started this all by just being as welcoming as possible and saying, I'm looking for new partners every day, but they need to align with our mission. They need to align with our core values and our principles of how we're doing our work. There needs to be locally led implementation and management of work. That's a really, just really critical part of this. It's why I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. It's one of the reasons I'm excited to have Nicole joining our team, because I know that that's something that she has built processes for and cares very deeply for. So I value that. I value that expertise, and I'm excited to get that in play. And then the other part, which connects to my part as a researcher, is that evaluation, assessment, and accountability has to be driven by community. I understand better. I just had a conversation with the deputy mayor about this, 2 days ago, about I'm not going to get into particular what it was, but where I'm essentially saying, hey, as somebody who works in the area, as a resident of the area, my data is better, actually. I have the best data. And when I walk into a meeting, and that's what I try and work with community groups, civic associations, whatever, is that if they control the data, they control the conversation. And so whatever I can do to help them understand that, because we've all been in those meetings around planning, where you walk in and somebody tells you what your community is through their data set and through their lens. And the more that we are empowering and working with communities to drive those conversations, the better we all are, and the better we're building sustainable solutions. So those were like some of these like basic principles that I was sort of throwing out there in the world and say, okay, I think I have to build on this. When I also looked and I started doing sort of an assessment of like what's going on in the city that are different ways that we are stumbling over being able to move forward in this community. I thought of a few different things. Again, I'm not going to go deep into this. I put some of these ideas in, I think it was a Plan Philly op-ed, I don't know when. I don't know, my time is not great, but I think that's where I wrote this. But some of the things that we keep failing, what I was doing is I was looking and saying, let's look at the last 20 years. Because what you keep trying to convince us to do as communities is to look at the last couple of years, right? No, we got to look at the whole history. We got to look at why things work and don't work if we're really looking for solutions. And some of the like core things that kept coming up, because believe me, there have been a number of strategies of things that we're trying. And we're in the midst of one right now. The thing I named with the Attorney General is one of 3 or 4 major efforts that are happening right now. And the things that run sort of in common usually are the centralization of City Hall within it, which I question. You know, I strongly question whether that is the proper place, that if that is the right seat for some folks to be sitting. There's a seat for folks in City Hall, but I think they're sitting in the wrong ones. That for a place like up here, we continue to central policing as one of the primary strategies. And that's why I brought up the little fact at the beginning when I said, hey, we just entered like this major initiative, which I know has taken 3 to 4 years. You can read the article in the Inquirer just from the other day that's sort of detailing some of that. We're talking about a multi-year effort for millions and millions of dollars, which yielded 8,000 bags of heroin, which is something, but it is this big in hundreds and hundreds of $1 million industry up here. And when people ask, you know, what do we need to do with that? We need to replace that with hundreds and hundreds of $1 million workforce development strategy. You know, that's how we have to be thinking at this point. But we have to understand the scale and these interventions that we're doing that are centralizing policing, they ain't putting a dent in these things. We lack regularly, just as I described, an authentic participatory community engagement process. We continue to treat Kensington as the problem instead of sort of the victim of all of the things that have taken place for so long. And as a result, there haven't been any measurable, sustainable successes. So moving forward, we really need to think about that everything needs to be blown up from how we've done things in the past. And we need to set a new stage. We need to think about new variables. We need to think about new leadership. You know, we need to think about you know, the timing and the challenges, which just keep shifting again. And we need to put all of those in play. I think the example then of SEPTA, and that's where I wanted to get to that a little bit. Again, if folks are somewhat familiar what happened, you know, a couple months ago, basically folks were alerted up here that the Somerset station would be closing indefinitely for repairs as a result of, in essence, everything I just described. I'm not questioning whether or not the conditions were as deplorable as folks were describing. And those were unsafe conditions for residents as well as employees, right? But we have to think about the process of how they engaged the community, which they would never have engaged another community the same way, of just saying your primary form of transportation in the island that you live in, again, getting into all the geographic boundaries, all those pieces is going to be removed in 4 days or whatever it was. That would never happen anywhere else. Just like all of the issues that have been placed here would not have happened anywhere else. What's in common is, again, people living in poverty and people of color. And so we had this situation where we look and we go, oh my goodness, this is a serious problem for this community. And going back to what I described before in terms of strategy, in terms of a community-driven plan for when we're doing different things, I looked and I said, actually, this is an opportunity to think about things differently. This is an opportunity for us to address this differently. And we went into very intentional moves. And again, I use this example because I think it attaches to how we have to be moving forward from an actual larger development plan for this area that connects to real estate and connects to a lot of other different issues. We very intentional. We looked and we saw the common ground between the whole area. It was intentional of not just saying, hey, look at this issue at Somerset. We said, look at this issue from south of Lehigh up to Tioga. And we reached out to those other groups and we said, this is something that we can all agree on. We can't all agree on a lot of things up here. We don't all have the same opinion about whether there should be a safe injection site. We don't have the same agreement of whether or not, you know, this should come in or policing strategies, but we could all agree that this was a basic thing that we all needed access to and was critical for this community. And again, very valuable. And I'm still convinced that it was a test balloon to see if folks would respond to this or not. Because I guarantee you, once the area is gentrified, if that's the path that goes, the trains would run. There's no question about that. And so it needs to run for the current Kensington residents. We moved quickly. People were unified in what they were doing. We set the story through writing the piece that was referenced. We said, this is the story. Because otherwise it was going to go in other directions about how nasty we are. You know, that's what the story was going to be. But we said, no, here's the story, and here's other people to talk to tell their story. And there were literally dozens and dozens of stories that were written, reported on about what was going on up there. And it brought the attention that was necessary. And it also forced SEPTA, as well as the city, to go into regular conversation and planning around how things were going to play out as a result of that. So all of that, we went from a situation of an indefinite closure to 5 to 6 weeks to reopen in 2 weeks, right? So what was the difference? You know, what was the difference was engagement by the community. You know, that has power. And it drove the situation to something that had a result that people actually benefited from for once. And that's why that's a core tenet of how anything has to move forward up here. You know, speak the desire. Our role is to be in a position to bring resources and support those efforts however we can and to move those things forward. When we're thinking about how we move forward in general, I think there's, you know, a couple things I'll just touch and I'll sort of close this down because I know I'm running out of time here. And as you're seeing, I can talk forever once I start talking. Taking some of those pieces before, I'll just hit them again. The solutions need to be a regional approach. You know, what's going on here, the investment isn't, some people want to like hate on, I don't know, the council people or stuff like, I don't. The council people don't have billions of dollars to fix this situation. I'm not going to hate on them for that. This is something that we need a partnership at a massive level that centers the community in those decisions and those processes, but it needs the city, it needs the state, and it needs the feds to get where we're going. And I think it's also important to note with that when I'm saying like the approach needs to bring all this together, because we are caring for the whole region's issue. You know, that's an important part of it. But one of the things I'll also say is that, you know, historically, what was the foundation? Was there enough collaboration up here to do this? I would say now there is. You know, was there enough of a foundation also that centers these really important core principles? It's important to us that we not only are you know, a strong collaborator in what we're doing, but we're also an organization that has invested heavily in racial equity, diversity, and inclusion work for our organization and for all the partners that we work with. That's a part of our foundation. We've invested very deeply in trauma-informed communities work. That is something that we have partnered with in a number of different, you know, organizations in the area. That's the foundation to build from, you know, when we're doing this regional approach. And I'll also say, and you can take it as arrogant or whatever, but part of the denial of local leadership is saying that they're not people qualified who are people of color from the neighborhood who can lead efforts going forward. I'm here. I'm here. There are other leaders. We are here. We're ready to go, you know, but we can't have the resources denied us at this point for what we need to get things done. But the excuses are gone. I just want to keep saying that the excuses are gone for people not investing in this community the way that they should be investing. And so there's that piece. There's a piece of really thinking about the strategies that have been happening up here. And I'll keep saying, this may not go well with this crowd, but if here, then everywhere. The strategies are constantly put on this community that are saying, hey, yeah, we've decided X, we're going to try this strategy. And you're experimenting again on those with the least power on a regular basis with things that are clearly going to fail. So I'm open for anything. You want to try something out, try it here, try it in Rittenhouse, try it in Pennypacker area of the city, try it in West, try it everywhere, but you don't experiment with just here. That we need to have this very comprehensive approach. There is not an approach that is going to be successful, and that's what connects to why a lot of the developers that have been up here have not had a lot of success, is because dropping a single building isn't going to do the job. Like I said, the pieces that I'm naming are all parts of the puzzle that all need to be addressed at the same time, and there needs to be entities that are able to handle all of those things at once. There needs to be that level of coordination, that level of expertise, and all operating from these same basic principles. It is a pie. I always think of it as sort of a Trivial Pursuit piece, and each one of those wedges is just a piece of that. And when you get them all in there, you win. You have a solution, and that's how we need to be operating. We can't just do one slice and go, hey, I hope that works. And that's part of, again, why there needs to be local leadership. Because when it's not local leadership, guess what? It can work. And I talk about that always. I use violence intervention as an example. I remember years ago, there was a forum at Temple in one of our incredible spikes in violence in the city. And all the brass, all the folks from the city, all the researchers from Temple, everyone was there walking across stage, congratulating each other for all the great work. And I had a colleague who said, hey, I don't understand, how has that happened? How is everyone congratulating themselves while we're at our highest murder rate in 10 years? And I was confused too. Then it hit me. I said, it was successful. Everyone who's walked across that stage got promoted, got tenure, got raises, got all of these things. It was successful for them. It was not successful for the community. And this goes back to the thing I said before. The community needs to be the ones that are determining success, and with that, accountability. And so we need to really think about that. We need to think about the scale and the reality, that the reality is we can't just look and say, hey, this $50,000 project here or there is not going to solve a $1 billion problem. And that doesn't mean we can't do something with that small piece, but we have to acknowledge the reality of what we're really coming up against. Connected with that, this piece, again, just around resources, where they're going, who's driving it, and that goes again to these pieces around leadership, and who is the leadership of this work as it moves forward. So again, I could go sort of on and on with that. I think I wrote that somewhere, and I'm happy to share those pieces. I'll just end with this. Some of where I've really been trying to push, and hopefully folks are hearing it in some of what I'm saying, is the idea of a small P versus a big P plan. And what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis are really small P plans. But because of those that it is their job to create small P plans, and for them to personally advance, essentially, they have to convince us it is the big P plan. And when we sort of falsely convince ourselves we are engaged in a big P plan, we stop actually developing a real big P plan. And we often walk away from that moment, and people stop investing in those solutions, all of those pieces. And so I've gotten in a little bit of, I don't want to say trouble, but I've gotten a lot of pushback from some folks over the past couple of months, because I have identified what people are trying to sell as big P plans as small P plans. And that upsets people. That upsets people because it threatens them. It threatens them. And I don't care, because my mission isn't keeping somebody in their job. My mission is around this community and providing for this community. And if what we are doing is not leading to that, then it is not a success as far as I'm concerned, and we're going down the wrong path. I will just close by again sort of saying thank you for letting me take all this time and to spend so much of it in this sort of contextual way. It's why I'm saying I'd love to talk with some of y'all 6 months from now, a year from now, to sort of share where things are going. Because of all the things that I've listed, I think it has affected our shifts in our strategic and operations plan. It's affected how other partners are operating here right now in trying to actually achieve a big P plan. But we need to continue moving in those directions. And we need to have dramatic shifts to get where we need to go. And we're going to need a lot of different partners who are, again, aligned with these missions and these core values for us to be successful as determined, again, success as determined by the residents here. And so they are the ones that are benefiting as we move forward. And with that, I will stop speaking.
Thank you so much for all of that. Hi, my name is Veronica. I'm the Design Equity Task Force Chair for the Design Advocacy Group. And I just want to say that it's so refreshing to hear from a leader who is so authentic and empathetic and just calls it, you know, what it is. So we have a couple questions from the audience. I see George wants to ask a question around development strategies. And I do see Venice with her hand raised. And then I do have a couple questions if we have time. So George, do you want to get us started?
Okay, sure. Thank you, Veronica. As Dr. McKinney knows, I took an experiment last night. I saw a HUD questionnaire that was available to any member of the public that could propose a neighborhood revitalization project grant. And it had all sorts of bells and whistles and goals, education, housing, opportunity. It was great. And then you got down to the bottom and it was $5 million for the entire country. And they were expecting to select 11 projects. This was for planning. So presumably there's some leverage beyond that. But one of the things I look at sort of as a bit of a historian of urban renewal is that the early days of urban renewal in the 50s and 60s, slum clearance was the term used. And it was thought that by destroying slums, you would improve cities. In fact, you were removing a lot of low-cost housing. You were making conditions worse for the very people who lived there. And that resulted in a shift towards neighborhood emphasis, such things as the Model Cities program, which was centrally conceived at the federal level, had some successes in cities other than Philadelphia, but was not deemed a total success by any means, stretch of the imagination. And then, of course, the federal government moved towards a great deal of decentralization and then a reducing of the community block grant money. So the money was much less. So that, to me, that places even more emphasis on the city of Philadelphia, to conceive of what neighborhood renewal might work, how it might work, what are the elements that might be required for it to work. And the city has a roughly $5 billion budget. And I think there must be some nooks and crannies there, because while security is important, policing is not an urban renewal strategy. And so I mentioned some initials here, like PHFA, HUD, then a private organization that operates in your area, Shift Capital. And then I also, near the end, you sounded like you were describing a version of the redevelopment authority that was site specific to the neighborhood that had, and maybe could you comment on where the conceptual chain goes, of where the tools need to be created, and then maybe a little bit about the resources.
Great question. And a sort of short version of where my head is with this, it goes back to some of what I was saying at the beginning, which is, I think we need to look at the full landscape of every potential player and then be able to assess who really is coming to play the way that we need to get it done. I don't think going in ever saying it's got to be X path or Y, and I think that's some of what you're describing is generally going to be successful. It's looking at the principles, looking at the potential players, because we're going to need so many, to be successful in what we're doing. But we have to, I think what we can do as a CDC also, though, is provide an environment and a foundation and something for folks to invest in. Because I think that that's some of the confusion right now, is there isn't enough collaboration, there isn't enough of a vision for what this could be beyond some of the small pockets. All of those pieces, I think, are really critical. And then I think it's matching what is possible, who is really out there, who's really ready. We all know it from a funding standpoint. I can go knock on the door of who I want to fund me forever, right? And if they ain't ready, at a certain point, I'm wasting my time and I'm wasting their time. I want to know who's ready to work right now. And if we have the right leadership in place and we have the right partners at the table, we will come up with the proper solution to move forward. So I think there's a lot of different forms this could take. And I think some of the pieces are there, again, that were not there before. And it's about actualizing them now and really getting people to actually step in.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Venice, do you have your question ready?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you for attending and everything you said. Right on, right on, right on. This will be televised. For so long, as someone who was born here, we've been told no. No, you're not good enough. No, your community doesn't deserve this. For so many decades, we've been told no by leadership, by the city of Philadelphia. And there's leaders everywhere, all over the city. And when I saw the protests that you had, you brought people up, you rise them up, you had them speak. And it wasn't just about you as a doctor, it was about the people. And it's pretty amazing because honestly, at the end of the day, no one listens to you unless you have a degree behind you. They don't. They say you're not good enough. You don't understand. You didn't graduate high school. You are a welfare mom. You are this, and no one listens to the people. So I just kind of just saying thank you that we have, emotional as always, we have a Dr. Kensington now that is protecting the neighborhood. So in that context also, how are you going to help the residents in Kensington who decide to sell their house to maybe sell it to someone who's going to be a resident and not a speculator or a flipper?
Right. Great question. Thank you also just for the support, because sometimes people say, what can we do? There's a whole bunch of things that folks can do to support us. Sometimes it's coming like walking the street with us, Sometimes it's connecting us to a politician. Sometimes it's to a funder, whatever. So there is something for everyone who actually wants to support. And I know you've done a number of those things for us, so I appreciate that. I just wanted to say that. One of our main things is exactly what you're just describing, not just for residents, but also for business, some of the small businesses in the area. That's some of our push over the next few months is really identifying as many different partners and programs that can, do what we can to make sure that those that want to stay can stay. And that we're doing everything that we can from that, whether it's that they're purchasing, whether it's that they're fixing their homes, whatever that is. We want to keep people in their homes if they want to be in it. And I think some of this too, and I'm going to be blunt, more blunt than everyone wants to hear always. I think Kensington Ave should be black and brown, businesses. I think that's what's up. I think that we need to be explicit around, hey, this is the set of folks that have suffered the most from these things, and we should be drawing a bit of a line around it, just like we're feeling the pressure from gentrification, from everything. And I talked about it with another ED the other day and saying, I want to put a wall up around it and keep folks in, and I want to help them, I want to support them, and that's what we want to be doing. So that is a top priority thing on a day-to-day basis that we're trying to address.
Thank you. I will say I also appreciate that you're moving beyond protest, right? You're not just talking about angering people, but you're saying, no, let's initiate a struggle where grassroots folks are actually involved in the implementation of these solutions, which oftentimes, right, we see so many nonprofits that are just concerned with giving services and servicing that kind of cycle of poverty. You talked also about kind of big P plans and little plans. I'm wondering, what are the ways that you can kind of advise people to identify, like, what is a big P plan and how do we hold people accountable? I understand that, city council does not have the scale of money that we need, but at many levels, like you spoke about your temple experience, there's people that need to be held accountable. What are ways that you could advise for people to build power and build that accountability?
Okay. Great question. And I'll say real quick, I think the thing with the protest too is it's one of many tools, and that's why we got to fill our tool. There's sometimes that's going to make sense and there's sometimes it's not, and so I start there. I think that was a moment of accountability. That was a moment of accountability for SEPTA. We looked and we said, what will make them respond, right? What is going to make them see us and hear us and have to do something? And that had to go public, as they're a private entity that doesn't want to be embarrassed, So that's what we had to do. I think that when you ask about the big P, little P, one of the ones I think about is we'll get in a meeting. So I can be in a meeting with the city, for instance, and they're talking about the hundreds and hundreds of unsheltered folks in Kensington, right? And we can have a long list of strategies to dismantle encampments, right? To, as I was just describing, to remove cars, which are people's homes now, or whatever. We can go through that, but nobody's able to list where folks finally end up, and that we're reducing the number of people that are homeless. And that's part of the strategy. Part of how the strategy comes to this weird end is that south of Lehigh has been able to reduce violence and reduce the homeless population and reduce the folks that are suffering from addiction. The districts to the west, all of that, but we haven't reduced the number for Philadelphia, right? And any of those things. And so that's the difference between big P and little p to me, is are you actually addressing the numbers or are you just moving them around? And then the accountability, I think, can take a number of forms. It can be that march. It can be me writing an op-ed that maybe no one reads, but it angers a couple of people to the point they got to do something. And it's also the accountability through, when we talk about leadership, some of my thing too, and again, I shouldn't say these things in front of board members. I don't plan on being here forever. I'm here for this stage. And part of my primary responsibility and success for me, when they're doing an evaluation of me on the year to year, is how many local folks, residents, so forth, are increasing in their level of power to the point that I'm replaceable. That's the goal. That's part of the goal. And then there's a different level of accountability that comes when different folks are sitting in my seat too. So all of that are different parts of accountability.
Well, I know Veronica has a hard stop at 11:30, but there's two questions hanging out there. Michelle Gaffney, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure, thank you so much. First of all, as everyone has said, I'll just reiterate, thank you again for your time today. It's been really enlightening, really informative, and energizing, I would say. Also, as a resident who is involved in one of those groups that is ragtag volunteering in our own neighborhood, but trying to figure out where we fit in a larger picture, one of the questions I wanted to ask was, what do you find is the barrier to gaining support from whether it's newer residents or lifetime residents, for the cause. It just seems that it's a no-brainer that this is the right thing to focus on. What is it that people don't understand about development, gentrification, the effects, and why do you think people don't understand it?
I would break it into different categories when I'm thinking about organizing and stuff like that, because I think that's the question in a lot of ways. I would say there's a set of people that are usually the ones who are on the exploitative side that understand exactly what's going on. They may pretend they don't, but they understand exactly what's going on. I think for the folks that you might be speaking to more, I would be asking the question myself. I'm asking, what do I not understand? What do I not understand about their relationship to the community, their perspective, their lived experience? That's where I'm going to understand better. I don't always have the same position because I'm in a different position being here, right? I'm here and I've been here a long time, but I can leave. I have the resources. I have the power to live anywhere in the city. And that's a very different relationship to this neighborhood. And there are things I actually don't understand. And so when I'm trying to think about how I'm connecting with folks, I have to make sure that I'm coming to them, not necessarily asking, what they don't see about it, but what do I not see through their eyes? And then we can meet. We find ways to meet them. So I think it's really possible. But it is complicated. I was just talking with the Civic Association the other day that is just really struggling around organizing and getting people involved. And there was a long list, and some of those, though, some of it's around participating and supporting other folks' efforts. Some of it's around like knocking on doors. Some of it's around the thing I talked about. And what was interesting is some of their response was they weren't interested in doing any of those things. And I said, you're probably not going to bring new people into your civic association then. I'm not saying any of that with you. I'm just saying, like, those were some of the responses. And they said they just want people to just come to where they're at. And I said, well, good luck. Good luck. I know I ain't, so why would somebody else?
So last question as we wrap up, I think a decent one to end on. Can you provide some suggestions for non-Kensington residents to support your work, everything you got going on? How can folks get involved?
Yeah, okay. So there's a few different ways. One is, like I said, I'm trying to connect the dots with any sort of sources of power, whether that's money, politic, whatever. And so any way that anyone can connect us to that, that's a good thing. That helps us. Any way that you're able to share sort of the messaging, of what we're doing. So if it's sharing things that I'm writing, things that myself and other community groups are sharing with the world, circulate that. That's let Kensington tell its story. That's a very important part of this right now. And then the other is, even from afar, when people stop seeing things purely as, again, sort of from a deficit space, but looking at all the strengths that we have, and even from afar can support the leadership and saying that, hey, there is strong leadership there. There are ways forward. There are solutions. That matters, So changing the conversation is a big part of that. And that can happen from anywhere, but also sort of that entryway, that connection. What is one of the symbols of lack of power? It's around social capital, right? It's around inability to have access to that funder in that direct way, right? In that sort of back room way, instead of just that blind, cold proposal or something like that. So we need all those types of support, whatever. And so I would say, think about whatever power that you have, and are you willing and able to share that with us?
Well, I think it's time for our virtual round of applause. We certainly appreciate you coming and spending time and sharing with us today. We'll be posting this on our website, so we'll send you the link. Anyone who wants to get the link, it'll be on our events page, so you can share that on that YouTube link with folks and broadcast the message around. check in with us. We'll be sending a new e-blast with our July program with Mosaic Development. And I just, again, Dr. McKinney, thank you for joining us, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks for having me out, everyone. I appreciate it.
Happy Thursday. Thank you.
Happy Thursday to y'all. See y'all soon then.